Hey, let's build a component that will allow the user to conduct a transaction right from the front end. We're going to build a form where a recipient and amount can be specified. And this will send a POST request with the proper recipient and amount data to the backend. First up, in our actual application, let's make a new conduct transaction component. So we'll camel case this conduct transaction.js. We're going to import React and the component class from the React module. And in this case, we definitely want the component class because we're going to set up state within this conduct transaction component. To create our form, we can use a couple components to help us from React Bootstrap. So React gives us these nice form components that are stylized right away. So that is form group as well as form control. And we'll import these from the React Bootstrap library. All right, very nice. Next, this conduct transaction component will be on its own standalone page, but we still want a way to navigate back to the main home component. So let's import the link from React Router DOM. So we got the link component from React Router DOM as well. All right, finally, we can create the conduct transaction component itself, and this extends the component class. Overall, this conduct transaction component is going to allow the user to submit a transaction to the backend. This will require there for to be a recipient and an amount specified by the user. To keep track of what the user types, we're going to have both of these fields updated in the state. One is the recipient, which by default is an empty string, as well as the amount, which will start off as 0. Then let's structure the component with a render method. So overall, let's return a div, and as its class name, let's make it conduct transaction so that way we can stylize it a bit more later. Similar to the blocks component, overall, we're going to have a link that goes back home. So let's have a pair of link tags. This will go to the home component, and the address for this, or rather the route endpoint, is the /. As an overall title, let's have conduct a transaction. Okay, there's going to be two primary fields for the user to specify when conducting a transaction, the recipient and the amount. So we're going to have an input field for both of these, and we capture both of those with our React Bootstrap form groups. So we have one form group for the recipient and then one form group for the amount. The form group defines a section in the form, and the input itself is created with that form control component. So let's have a self-enclosing form control component that won't have any children. This form control takes a few properties. For one, we specify the type of input it is. And in this case, for the recipient, it's going to be a regular text input. We can give the input a placeholder to cue the user what they should type in here. And then this is going to be the recipient. The most crucial properties are coming next. The first one is the value. And the value for this input is going to be this.state.recipient. Okay, and probably the most crucial property is the onChange property. On a change of this form control, let's call a method that will create soon called updateRecipient. This updateRecipient method will do the job of updating the recipient in the state according to whatever the user types within this form control. All right, before we create the updateRecipient method though, let's also add the form control for the amount. So feel free to copy this entire chunk of code over here. And we're going to adjust this so that way it's relevant to the amount. The input type for this form control is number instead of text, since it's an amount value. The placeholder will be amount. The value will update this.state.amount. And on a change, instead of updating a recipient through an updateRecipient method, we're going to have an updateAmount method. Okay, let's define the two update functions for the input. First, we have the updateRecipient method. So let's attach this as a class property right away. This will have a callback whose parameter will be an event object that is created within React. This event object, again created by React, is within the context of the onChange handler. It contains information about what the user typed into the input. Now, the most relevant piece of information in our case is the event.target.value. So this event populated by React is going to have a target field, which contains a value field, which matches what the user typed into the form control itself. As a result of this, we'll set the state of the recipient using the setState function to that event.target value. So we'll say the recipient is now the event.target value. Okay, we're going to do the same thing for the update amount function. Feel free to copy that chunk of code, but then update it for the amount. Now the amount should be event.target.value as well. Cool. There's one catch with this though. The amount needs to be a number. The event.target.value becomes a string according to what the user typed. Even though we have input of number over here, by default React stores the event.target.value as a string. So therefore we need to surround this with a number type conversion to get the number value from that event.target.value string. Cool. Finally, before we move on to actually posting the created transaction through a new fetch request, let's log the state of this component to make sure it's working properly. At the top of the render method, let's add a console.log of this.state with a string first and then the actual this.state.value. The string is going to help us identify what is logging. All right, before we can interact with this new conduct transaction component, well, we need to make sure that it's available in the actual app. First up, we're going to export this by default. So export by default conduct transaction. And then we'll want to add a new route for this within the main index.js file. So we're going to import conduct transaction in addition from the components directory. So make sure to have import conduct transaction from components conduct transaction. We're going to add a new route for this, and the route is going to be at conduct transaction. Okay, cool. And then finally, the component that is used is the new conduct transaction component. Coincidentally, we're going ABC. That's pretty nice so far that we have app and then blocks and then conduct transaction. It was pretty lucky, not so much intentional. Anyways, back in the app.js file, now we should also have a link that goes to conduct transaction. And to do that, we're going to have a new div for this new link, so that way they're on their own lines. Let's have link component tags. This is going to go to the new /conduct transaction endpoint. And the text for this will say conduct a transaction. All right, very nice. Make sure you have all of those changes. This new link change in the app.js file, as well as the new route within index.js, and of course the conduct transaction component itself. Nice. With that, save the file. If you don't have the application going already in the command line with npm run dev, make sure to do so. And then go ahead and visit localhost 3000 in the browser. And on a refresh, you should get a fetch of the wallet info and then also see the new conduct a transaction link. And clicking on it, we see this huge form where we can enter a recipient and an amount. Cool. Immediately, you're going to notice that it looks like the inputs are way too wide. They're spreading across all the way horizontally on the screen. We're going to fix that in just a moment. But the one thing to check is that if you inspect the element, remember we had that state log. So let's go ahead and log this.state. And already as soon as the component loads, we find the initial state. But if we update the recipient to something like foo address, you'll notice that on every type, the recipient updates in the state. The same thing for the value. We can make this as big as we want. And the amount will be updated to an actual number within our JavaScript function. Cool. Or rather within our state of the conduct transaction. All right. So that was pretty awesome. Changing the input fields definitely changed the state of the component. But again, let's fix the glaring thing of this overall input field spreading across all the way on the application. So in the index.css file, let's stylize our conduct transaction class. We're going to have a conduct transaction class. And then we're going to give it a margin of 10% so that way on the left and the right, and even on the bottom of top, it'll make sure it has spacing of 10% of the window size. With that saved back in the application, cool, that looks much better. Nice. Now that we have the form updating with the user's relevant input in this state, let's make sure that the user can then submit this data and post a transaction to the backend using those state variables. Let's hook that up next.